like to begin, we'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely. So just again, for the record, for anybody else that's new that's joined, I'm Caitlin Davis. I'm from the Department of Education. And we are here doing a presentation on the Education Trust Fund portion of the Department of Education's 2022 and 2023 biennium budget request. We are going to continue on with Amy Clark, the administrator of the Bureau of Facilities, to talk about the Public School Infrastructure Fund and then Charter School Lease Aid. And then our last topic that we're going to be discussing today will be Mark Vaganello, who will be talking about adequacy funding and charter school funding. So Amy?
Hello. So again, Amy Clark, from the Department of Education, Bureau of School Safety and Facility Management. Give me a thumbs up if you see that summary page. You all able to see that on your screen? Okay, so the Public School Infrastructure Fund. This is in your handout. This is somewhat short, but I have a summary page and a list of all the project reports. And so of the 42 pages, you'll be happy to know that about 40 pages of it are the awards. So I just have this summary page here for you. And to talk a little bit about the Public School Infrastructure Fund. So again, there's my contact information if you want to know more about it. The law is under RSA 19815Y and Z. And essentially the Public School Infrastructure Fund, in a nutshell, was established in 2017. The fund had a total amount of $28 million available to public schools, which also includes charter schools, because of course charter schools are public schools. And it reimbursed schools for the following 3 types of projects. E-rate state match, which is essentially a federal program that needed a state matching percent from the state. So this fund provided that match. And E-rate projects are simply to bring fiber connection to schools. So that construction of the fiber connection to the schools. And that was type 1. Type 2 was addressing life safety deficiencies at schools. And then the third type was improving security in schools. And just want to clarify, because I think a lot of times people get confused between life safety and security. When we talk about life safety, think about the fire marshal's office. Think about like buildings being condemned because of certain fire traps or things going on that would be hazardous to somebody's health or somebody being in danger in the building itself. Security, you can think of as the police department. That though the police department will be happy that you're putting in some improving security at your school. So security projects are hardening schools in this particular case. Hardening schools with door locks, bollards in front of the school, vestibules, security cameras, and things like that. So those are the 3 categories of projects. The status of the public school fund is that all of the awards have been awarded and all the money has been claimed. So the Public School Infrastructure Fund closed. The awards were final on December of 2020. So from 2017 to December of 2020, all the awards went out and all the awards were claimed. And there's no new applications because there's no new money in this fund at this time. The Public School Infrastructure Fund Commission is 2 members of the House, 2 members of the Senate, the Director of Homeland Security and Emergency Management, the Commissioner of Education, the Chair of the School Building Authority, and the Chair of the State Board of Education. So they formed a commission in consultation with the governor. And this commission, they awarded awards to schools to perform one of these 3 category type projects. And in general, of those 3 categories, the reimbursement rates were 10% for the E-rate state match, because that's what was required by the federal government, that the state give a 10% match. So that's what the fund gave for the E-rate projects. For the life safety projects, that depended on their building aid rate. The commission decided that they would grant out the building aid rate for those projects, which was between 30 and 60%, like we talked about already. And then for security projects, it was just a flat rate. The commission chose a flat rate of 80% for any security related project. Here's a summary of the book. Oh, I think I can make that bigger. Here's a summary of those awards. We approved $31 million, almost $32 million of awards. If you're like, that's weird, I thought you only got 28 million. Well, that is true, but some people returned their award because they were not able to either get the local match or they just withdrew their awards. And other people got an award, let's say for 50,000, and they only spent 48,000. So I was able to take that extra money and put it back in the bucket and then re-award that money. So that is slightly more than what the fund was because money was returned to the fund. So those approved grants for all 3 categories was about $32 million. We paid $27 million, and there was about $4.5 million that fund spent. You can see there's a breakout of, if you're curious as to see, like, where did this money go? E-rate, you can see, was a very, very small amount. All of the E-rate projects were approved that put in a request. There were just not that many requests. Let's skip over improved security for a minute. You can see life safety. We paid out about $3 million on life safety projects. And if you're thinking, that doesn't also sound like very much money, because it's only 10% of what was put out, roughly. Well, that's because life safety projects in the law have to be very specific life safety projects. The law requires that they be under imminent danger or substantial risk. And those definitions are actually defined by the state fire marshal's office. And you can tell that this is a situation in a school where these are pretty significant issues. Some of those projects were to bring wooden structures up with a sprinkler system. Some of those were like installation of fire panels. These were like direct violations of the code, and that helped correct those problems. But the main story of the Public School Infrastructure Fund is really that the Public Infrastructure Fund really went to improve the security at schools. And you could see 24 of the 27 million went out to schools that to harden their schools for improving the security of the schools. Cameras, doors, locks, security glass, vestibule check-in windows, things like that. And all schools that wanted funds, which were almost everybody, was able to receive at least one award. The commission did a really good job of reaching out to all the schools. They went through and awarded money, and then they said, oh, let's hold up. Before we give you your 3rd or 4th award, let's check with all of those other districts that maybe they haven't had time to apply yet. And the commission worked really hard to get everybody an opportunity that wanted to. And I'd say 90, I don't know this number exact, but I'm just going to say about 95, 98% of the school districts received some kind of award. There are a couple of schools that did not apply, but for the most part, all our schools received awards of some amount. So there's that. If you're wondering, well, how many people applied? Here's a summary of those applications, a summary of how many were approved, not approved. There is a wait list. So there is a wait list of applications. We have run out of money. There are 59 applicants left on the wait list, totaling about $1.2 million worth of grant requests. Keep in mind that the commission This was a first come, first serve. However, if you had not received an award yet, you got to jump the line in front of anybody that already received an award. So the 59 applicants on that wait list have already received 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 awards. That doesn't mean they don't want more. I don't want to imply that, but that's not 59 schools. That does not represent 59 schools that didn't get security money. Security money was granted to all schools that applied. And 23 projects withdrew. Yeah. And that's a breakout by the category. Now, if you wanted to see, I won't go through the next 40 pages. You're welcome.
Amy,
Yeah.
excuse me just a second. So did the Public School Infrastructure Committee meet to give out any of this 1.2 million? Or is that going to lapse back into the education or someplace?
Yeah, those have been approved by the commission in the sense that if more money was appropriated, the commission has already, and the governor has already said that those are projects that are on the wait list, but there is no more money to award them.
Oh, okay. So didn't I see someplace you've got 1.2 to be returned to the general fund?
Yeah, and that is because those projects, so when we got money back, we issued, so I get money back from schools, then I issue the next person on the wait list money. However, when December 30th closed, that's all the money that came in the last month, and I have no time to then reissue another award in December because the fund closed December 20th, not December 2020. So yes, I have extra money, but I have no way of awarding it because it just came in December and the award expires in December.
Okay, so basically this 1.2 is going to lapse to the general fund in the end of this fiscal year.
Correct. And you can see, these just happen to be the numbers. 1.237 will be returned, and the amount on the wait list is 1.236. They're very close numbers, but yeah, that money will lapse and those people will remain on the wait list because the award officially, not technically, but the award expired in December 2020, and that will be lapsed back into the general fund.
Okay, thank you very much. Representative Heath, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Amy, is there an action that we could possibly take to get those funds released so that those school districts could get benefit from those?
The law, I think you'd be in RSA 198.15Y, there is a deadline for those awards. So I don't think the commission could meet and decide. There just isn't enough time. So then the projects then have to go to fiscal and then go to GNC, and then the school districts would have to come up with their local share, and we'd
All
be
right,
at
I
the end of the
understand.
fiscal year.
Thank you.
Sorry, Representative Murray?
Yeah, I think maybe Mary sort of answered it. Being relatively new, would these projects be appropriate in HB2? Is this something we could put in HB2, the specific projects that have been approved? But I think I heard Amy say that the school districts would still have more work to do, so that apparently wouldn't be a mechanism. Is that right?
Well, I can say there is language in House Bill 2, I believe that's proposed to extend the public school infrastructure fund and put additional money in there. And so if that happens, then I imagine the commission could decide whether to release these funds or not and keep these people going. But the current law is what ends. House Bill 2, I do think proposes to extend that out.
Thank you.
So yeah, so the whole reason why we actually telling you guys about the public school infrastructure today is not just because we want you to be aware of what's happened in the past, but because the governor's office did actually put $30 million, $15 million in each year in 22 and $15 million in 23 into the public school infrastructure fund. So had that not happened, we actually probably wouldn't be including this information in our presentation, but we felt that it was important that you know about the fund, and this is potentially something that may be funded going forward. And you will need to, as a commission, or a committee rather, make a decision on that.
And with that said, the Public School Infrastructure Fund has since been amended after all the awards were, it is a little bit different written. Last year it was amended, the law was. And so now I think that there's eligibility for HVAC systems or systems that improve air quality that is in the Public School Infrastructure Fund currently. But by the time that was added, all the awards had already been allocated out.
And follow up,
Yes, please, go ahead.
given the COVID, is there federal money that might be coming in or to be used for some of these projects?
For not the projects that the commission currently looked at, because it did not include HVAC systems. But but to answer your question, yes, federal money, you can currently use ESSER funds for anything COVID related, which is air quality, certainly air quality, HVAC systems. Try not to, I'm just going to say this. Keep in mind that you can't just take an HVAC system and put it into an old building and expect that it's going to run efficiently and work the way an HVAC system is designed to work. For new buildings, relatively new buildings, definitely. Maybe that's for a different conversation.
Meeting, sorry. Do you have anything else, Amy?
And then lastly, on the Public School Infrastructure Fund, it's just a list. You'll see that all the remaining pages are, if you want to see what your district received or any district received, you can see this is actually the status of every award. And so even though most of these say paid in here, you will see some, not many, but you'll see some that went unclaimed. There was some, like here was one that's withdrawn. So for some reason they withdrew it. You can scroll through and see the status, and then it has that grant category. Remember I told you there were 3 grant categories. The vast majority of them are going to say improved security. And then if you're interested to see, how much did they some of this money went back to the Public School Infrastructure Fund. This one came $619 underfunded. They spent $619 less. So that money went back into the Public School Infrastructure Fund to be re-awarded. And it is amazing how these when you're talking about $30 million, these little guys add up. So I was pleasantly surprised. We had a $5 million or $4 million wait list, and we were able to fund almost everybody on the wait list. And that's it for the Public School Infrastructure Fund, unless you have questions.
I would just like to say that I did sit on that commission, and I think that we did a very good job in allocating the money. And I can tell you that Amy makes it look easy here. It was not easy. We had, if you think we got a lot of paperwork on HB2 or all of this stuff, we got about the same amount on the Public Infrastructure Committee, but it did a lot of good things for the state, and hopefully we'll be able to put some money into it this year. So Representative Heath, you have a question?
I just want to, Madam Chair, I just want to concur with everything you're saying. I too am on the committee, and Amy, you are remarkable, and I just have to thank you so much because you've made such an effort to spend every single penny. You recalculate, you do everything so efficiently. So just to echo what our chair said, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you. And the schools would reiterate that too, for you all, for those that were on commission. The schools have reported that you know, essentially they applied and then they spent the money and got reimbursement. You know, they said they were going to buy cameras and they went and bought cameras, and it was a relatively painless process for them. So they're not always used to that especially from my office, so that's good. So I think next up, unless you have more questions about the Public School Infrastructure Fund.
No, thank you very much. And Caitlin, take it over, please.
Well, you're not quite done with Amy yet. We have one more topic for Amy to present, which is lease aid to chartered public schools. So
I'm
Amy?
sorry, excuse me.
Oh, that's okay. And so the final program here that is out of my office is the lease aid, the charter school lease aid program. And can you see this all? You can see this, it says lease aid at the top. Okay, I never know if it switches when I switch, so I'm glad that it did. So this is only 3 pages, and program summary, and then the payments itself. Again, here's my contact information if you need me. And for lease aid, that is under RSA 198.15HH, and there are lease aid rules under 8323. Lease aid is simply grant money to assist public charter schools in meeting the cost of their annual lease payment. And lease aid grants, the law says that the lease aid covers 30% of their annual lease aid payment, up to $30,000 per school. So I'd say a little more than half of the schools, that full 30% covers their full lease aid payment. They don't get capped, but then probably the other 40% of schools maybe are actually subject to the cap. They get what, to the $30,000 per year. Just keep in mind, charter schools that own their own buildings are not eligible for lease aid. It is specific to a lease agreement. The funding source is the general fund. And the history of lease aid is really that lease aid was created in law in 2003, but it wasn't funded for the first time until fiscal 2020. And so we've only had 2 appropriations, fiscal 20 and fiscal 21. The first year was $200,000. And when we went to pay the 30% of those payments with a cap of 30,000, we couldn't meet those payments. So all the schools were prorated down to 44%. So you can see that was a significant reduction in payment. So in fiscal 21, the lease aid appropriation was $500,000. And so I was able to make full lease aid payments using that cap of 30,000 and the 30%. Total of my lease aid payment of $382,000. So again, the difference between these will also go back, be lapsed back into the general. And if you're curious to see what those payments were, I will make this bigger, but there's the whole sheet. It's all one sheet. And you can see the charter school name is here. And this is broken up into fiscal 20 and fiscal 21. This is the eligible amount. This is the grant amount that had I had enough appropriation, I would have been able to grant them. And then this is how much they were prorated. So you can see $30,000, they were going to be paid $30,000, but their appropriation wasn't enough. So they were prorated down to $13,000. You'll see this is a common number because this is 44% of $30,000. And you see it down here. Anybody that's capped ended up at that $13,000 mark. So the total grant amount for 2020 was $200,000. Fiscal 21, the eligible lease amount, and then their grant amount, I had enough, so they were not prorated. I did not have to prorate schools. The total amount was that $382,000. And then I included, some people have asked, like, oh, what about this school or what about that school? And here's the reasons this year in fiscal 21, I went back and asked schools, why didn't you apply? Sometimes it's because they don't have a lease. You can see that some of these should say no lease, and some schools did not apply for lease aid. And that's all I have for lease aid, unless you have some questions.
So, Amy, in the budget this year, I think was 500,000 again for 22 and 23. And you indicated that it looked like 385 would cover the leases. Obvious, that does not include any new charter schools that have come online for this year. And is there more than one that has come online this year?
Well, I'll answer that question for Amy. So there are 2 new charter schools that we are expecting to open this fall. So those 2 would obviously be eligible for lease aid, and they're not included here. Additionally, all of these schools that you see on this list in front of you that do not apply may actually apply next year. They didn't apply for whatever various reasons. A couple of them had a couple issues obtaining some of the documentation. Other ones just couldn't apply by the appropriate deadline and whatnot. So the 382 is the amount that was that applied and was approved this year, but 500,000 may not end up fully funding everybody, including the 2 new schools and the existing schools, if everybody does choose to apply.
And also keep in mind, there's unfortunately, I don't have the House bill number in front of me, but there is a House bill out there that increases the cap from 30,000 to 50,000. And that small change would already put it over 500,000. If that cap existed in fiscal 21, this total would have been like 520,000 or something like that.
Okay, thank you very much. Representative Heath, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. There's been a federal award of quite a large sum of money. Can any of that money be used for rent purposes?
So we are in the process of working through what is and is not allowable in the federal grant with the U.S. Department of Education. However, under the last charter school grant that we received, we were allowed to reimburse schools for 3 months prior to opening for a portion of lease expenses. So it was only for the 3 months prior to opening. After they open, they're eligible for anything. We don't know if those same requirements or allowabilities are under this grant or not yet. We haven't received that documentation from the feds.
All right, thank you.
Which makes sense if it's a startup grant, which is probably why it would cover some of the first few months of the lease.
Okay.
So that is
Amy?
it, unless you have some questions.
No, I don't want to cut you off, but thank you very much. And you've done a great job as always. So,
Great. Welcome.
okay. Caitlin, it's now your turn, I think.
So yes, but this year I've actually firmed up my presentation. So this year we are very lucky to have Mark Manganello on staff here at Department of Education. And he is going to be taking everything that he learned with helping Division II with the last biennium budget and everything he learned with working with Mickey and trying to give his best shot at the adequacy presentation. I'll be here if he needs any assistance or if there's any questions, but I think Mark has really got it completely under control. So Mark.
Oh, can you hear me? Can you see my screen?
We can hear you now.
For the record, Mark Manganello with the Department of Education. You received a 46-page PDF. Try to go through it quickly, try to touch upon the key points here. There's a table of contents to reference back to those documents. This is a summary, and if you worked with me with my legislative email, this is my DOE email now. Couple of things to point out: in state fiscal year 2020, full day kindergarten was added into the state adequacy aid formula. So prior to that, it was only half-day kindergarten, so it was bumped up to full day and moved into adequacy. There was a program prior to 2020 called Kino Garden, but that program was replaced by just putting full-day kindergarten in adequacy. Also in 2020, stabilization grants were restored to the 2012 level. And so stabilization grants are changes to the formula made in 2011 that negatively impacted the revenue towns, schools received from the state in 2012. If due to changes in the formula, you lost state funding for your school, you received a stabilization grant. And then in 2017, changes in the law made it so that those grants would phase out over a 25-year period, and they would phase out by 4% reduction each year over 25 years. So in 2020, those reductions stopped and those grants were restored to 100% of the 2012 level. And those changes exist in current law today. So they exist in 2021 and they will exist under current law in 2022. Another change in 2021 that you've probably heard about is the one-time aid. So that was $60 million. It was added to the adequacy aid formula in 2021, but it also expires in 2021. So it's one-time aid. It's a one-time addition to the formula, but it's set to expire at the end of this year. So it will not be available in 2022 under current law. Other things to note, and the commissioner talked a lot about this, is the FNR issue with the USDA waiving the documentation requirements that families complete those applications in order to be eligible for free and reduced price meals. They're just eligible automatically. And so it's great for those families, but at the same time, it creates data issues for the department because we use that documentation to calculate adequacy. And the commissioner talked about communities are trying their best to get those applications in, but it's still a challenge. And so that's an issue going on because of the pandemic. And then when you look at enrollment numbers in this 46-page PDF, you'll see some enrollment data. Enrollment data historically declines at around 1%-ish each year, but this year a 4% decline. So some families are leaving the public school system, and we're seeing that reflected in the enrollments. And this is, Caitlin introduced this document. This just shows school aid appropriations in a different table. This document is produced by the LBA. So Mickey published this in January 2020, I think so. And this just explains the adequacy aid formula for charter schools. So with charter schools, you have the regular cost of inadequate education components. So you have base aid, which is $3,708.78 times the number of pupils you have. And then you have a few differentiated aid categories. So for each eligible pupil eligible for free and reduced price meal, they receive $1,854.38 per each pupil eligible. So that's the part of the formula that's being impacted by the pandemic. Because of those waivers, the number of pupils is a lot lower than we would expect. So that's impacting the cost of inadequate education, which determines your aid. And then there's also English language learners. For each English language learner you have, you get an aid $725. And this is for state fiscal year 2020 and 2021. And then for each pupil receiving special education services, you receive $1,995.21. And then for each third grader who scored below proficiency on the third grade reading test and is not in any one of these categories, the school would receive $725.63 for each one of those pupils. So that's the adequacy formula, but this is explaining charter schools. And charter schools receive an additional grant per pupil of $3,479.22. And that would result in your total charter school aid. And then there's an updated document Mickey produced recently, the LBA produced, and it just has CPI adjustments. So no changes have been made to this formula between these two bienniums at the moment, except for the CPI adjustments are reflected here. So.
Representative Heath, you have a question?
Yes, please. Thank you, Madam Chair. What is the total figure then? So the total charter figure is 3,479 plus the base adequacy?
So the charter school figure, oh, so this would be, you're going to get a base. Oh, so yeah, for per pupil, you would get whatever the number is, the 3,708 plus that. But then if you have students qualifying for these eligibilities, you could potentially be eligible for those amounts as well.
So it's just, Madam Chair, may I please?
Certainly.
So they get all the add-ons, but they have that straight base of 3,479 plus the base adequacy plus the add-ons.
That's correct.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, if I could ask one more question, please.
Certainly.
This question is in relation to the one-time $60 million funding based on disparity aid.
Yep.
Can you tell me, did every district in the state get that, or just those with a high percentage of free and reduced lunch students?
Yep, so that's a good question. That aid was targeted. So if you had the fiscal capacity disparity aid was based on your equalized valuation per pupil. So if you look at your equalized valuation of your property and you divide it by the pupils, you get a EVPP, an equalized valuation per pupil. And any community that had an equalized valuation per pupil under $1 million was eligible for fiscal capacity disparity aid. So some communities have really high equalized valuation per pupil, and some have really low. So not every school qualified for that grant. And then the other component of the 60 million is the additional aid based on free and reduced price meal population percentage. So that one, you were eligible if you had your percentage of FNR eligible students was greater than 12% of your total school population, then you were eligible for that grant. And those grants were sliding scale, so those numbers vary depending on where you are in that metric.
Representative Heath, we actually have further down in the packet the entire 2021 town by town amounts. So you'll be able to see exactly which towns did and didn't receive a grant. And then we also put together a document per Representative Umberger's request, which shows all one-time aid that was received in fiscal year 21 to date, which actually includes the ESSER CARES money and the one-time adequacy funding. So those are later on in the packet, and we will get to those as well.
Perfect. So thank you.
Yep. So that was this is describes the charter school calculation for the current biennium we're going into. This document is just sort of a breakdown by charter school of the governor's recommended charter school aid for 2022 and 2023. Just kind of, we've already noted this, there's 2 new schools expected to go live in this next biennium. And these are, estimated enrollments for those schools. And then this should link up to what you see in your budget package.
So this is only the pupil aid, not the lease aid.
Correct. This is just the charter school adequacy. Correct.
Thank you.
This next document, it kind of describes charter school adequacy in the way you might be similar to seeing district public school adequacy in this more horizontal format. So this just walks you through 2020 and what that looked like, and you can see how the charter school moves through the formula. This next document is 2007 to 2021 charter school average daily membership and attendance. And we have the new schools on here. They're showing blanks for 2021 because they're not going to open by June 30th. And some closed charter schools, and you can kind of see the history of charter school. This is the district public school formula, which is different. There's some similarities with the charter school aid formula, but a little bit different. So just like charter schools receive adequacy, constitutional adequacy, district public schools as well. So the same formula generally applies there for the cost of an adequate education. The difference is something called SWEPT, the statewide education property tax. So the state applies a statewide property tax known as SWEPT. And what it does is the state needs to raise $363 million for the SWEPT. And what it will apply a tax across all the properties in the state. And it's around $2 per thousand. And that's the statewide education property tax. And that money is raised locally and it's retained locally. So it never makes its way to the state. It's kept by the locals. And so when you run the adequacy calculation, you do the base aid, you do the differential aid, you determine this amount, which is the cost of an adequate education. But there's something goes on, it's referred to excess swept. So if you had a community that had really high value properties, that $2 per thousand tax rate might raise, say, $2 million. But when you add up all their students using these calculations, their cost of an adequate education might only be $1 million. So that's sometimes referred to as donor towns, but they get to keep that money, so they don't donate it. The local community gets to keep it, but that's called excess swept. So if you hear that term excess swept, that's where that term comes from. But when you're calculating aid for a district public school, you first figure out the cost of an adequate education. You net it against any money they raise locally through that tax. It's a state tax, but it's raised locally, retained locally. So for some people, they might just keep their swept and they may be done with the formula. But if their cost of an adequate education was $2 million and they raised $1 million who swept, then their preliminary grant would be $1 million. It'd be the net, the difference. Then we talked a little bit about stabilization. Mickey's document explains it, and there's some eligibility issues with if you're an excess swept town, you don't receive stabilization. It doesn't impact a lot of communities. But cost of adequate education netted against the swept, add the stabilization grant, and then for state fiscal year 2021 only, you add in those additional aids. And Mickey kind of explains how those programs work in these little charts here. And then you add in fiscal capacity disparity aid, which we talked about. And that would equal the total education grant for 2021. This is another LBA document, which describes the biennium or the fiscal year we're about to go into. And a lot of the same components, cost of adequate education the same, you minus net against the swept, you add in stabilization, but those one-time aids are not there anymore. So that's an important thing to note. This is the current law, 2020, 2021, and then state fiscal year 2022. And this shows what the governor has proposed for state adequacy. And if you had a chance to look at HB2, the governor has a language in there to fix the FNR issue that communities are dealing with. So we normally see around 45,000 eligible FNR pupils in the state. That number's dropped down to around 34,000. So it's a very significant drop because of that USDA waiver issue. So when you look at current law, it's pretty low. And a lot of that is because of the FNR issue. So the governor has a calculation for when determining FNR, the department will look at your drop in enrollment and look at your drop in your FNR. And the percentage drop in your enrollment, your ADMA, the drop in your FNR cannot exceed the drop you see in your students. So if you had no drop in your students between state fiscal year 2021 and 2022, but you saw a really big drop in your FNR, you would bring your FNR population back to what you had pre-pandemic. And so when you run that calculation, based on current law, it brings it up $16.7 million. So that's the governor's budget, which the only change it makes to adequacy is just calculating how many FNR pupils will go into the equation.
Excuse me, Mark. You said if the 2021 school population dropped, then that is going to be the new figure for 2022.
So there's a better document. I actually probably misspoke because adequacy, it's a year behind. So let's see if we can, it's towards the end. Let's see if I can get to that quickly.
Okay, no problem. Matt, you have a question or a comment? Mickey, could you bring Matt up?
Yeah, I just brought Matt in. He should be able to speak now.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, hello, Chairman Umberger, members of the committee. Just wanted to see if I could help clarify the formula, and thank you, Mark, for walking the committee through that. Essentially, Another way to think about how that F&R correction is intended, we're looking at the historical percentage of students who are enrolled, who qualify for free and reduced lunch, and using that metric, that percentage of students, and applying it to the most updated enrollment figures, right? So that historical share of students that would have qualified, we know that there's been a federal change that has artificially brought down the number of families that are filling out the paperwork, but we know the need hasn't changed. If anything, the need has increased. So with that, looking at if you had 100 students before the pandemic and 28 qualified for F&R, we would take that 28% and multiply it by the most updated enrollment. And Mark, correct me if you have any different interpretation, but I think we said the same thing, just going at it from slightly different directions.
Yep, no, there's a lot of way to describe this situation. I like it that way. Think about it as a pre-pandemic ratio, and that ratio is frozen in time, and you're guaranteed that ratio. And that ratio is your F&R relative to your total student population. So they're going to hold you harmless to that ratio. That's what the governor's budget does.
So the enrollment number is going to be the enrollment for 2021.
Yep.
Okay. And you indicated that we had a 4% drop in school enrollment in 2021.
Yep. So the governor didn't change the way the base adequacy enrollment, so just a regular student enrollment, the governor didn't change the way we calculate that. We'll use whatever the numbers are going to be at the end of the year, we'll use those numbers based on the governor's proposal. But what the governor did change was how the F&R pupil amount, so that differentiated aid category, how that is calculated. We will use, if HB2 passes, we'll use that language currently in HB2 to bring that number up. So some base adequacy will decline because enrollments are declining, so base adequacy will decline, but F&R will grow under the governor's proposed.
I want to point out too, so that when we're talking about the 4%, we looked at as of October 1st in 2020 compared to October 1st of 2019. So that's where we're seeing the 4% decline. There will be an opportunity for school districts to change those or update those enrollments at the end of the year. And so a school district may only end up with a 3% decline or no decline at all, especially if a school, for example, had kids at the beginning of the year that chose to stay home because the school was using remote instruction for the first 2 months a year, then came in person and the kids came back in person. We are still expecting a higher than normal 1% decline, but there are opportunities for schools to update that information.
So this enrollment includes children that are doing full remote learning?
Yes.
Okay, so it's in person plus remote.
As long as the child continues to be enrolled in a public school. Now, if a child is doing remote learning and is now either doing remote learning through a non-public school or enrolled in a homeschool program, meaning they sent a letter of intent to homeschool to either the commissioner or a public or non-public school in the state, there's no adequacy now being paid for those kids. But if the kid is at home being instructed by the public school district and just participating in the physical location of the instruction is at home, they are included in the base adequacy counts.
Do we have any idea what happened to the homeschool percentage of students?
We do. We have an estimated homeschool percentage. It's actually on another slide when we get to it, but it did increase substantially this year.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, and yeah, we have some towards the bottom of the package. There's a lot of enrollment data, which is really helpful. I was going to try to toggle quickly to it, but we'll get to that soon enough. So this is just a town by town with the governor's proposed budget.
So we don't have a 2023 yet, is that correct?
That's correct. I think at this point, any estimates by the department to try to estimate 23 would be, I think would likely be wildly off because we're not even sure what's going to happen with COVID and, enrollments. I think that we might be able to do a better job maybe estimating 23 by the end of the school year, but certainly not in time for the budget.
So what do I do? Put 0 in the budget for 23?
It's probably not the best plan.
Oh, that's an option, right?
Okay, fiscal 23 in the governor's recommended budget though is using the same factors.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so it's basically budgeted at the same enrollments and everything as of right now. So
I mean, we tried to do a estimate, but we just don't have any enrollment data to see if that's going to be super accurate or not.
And you might want to remind them about the warrant that is in statute, just, when the budget amount doesn't align with the actual needed.
Yes. So yeah, if the Department of the Department of Education has the authority to draw a warrant regardless of what the appropriation awarded to us for adequacy is, and this is for both traditional regular public school adequacy and charter school adequacy. So for example, last year we only had, I forget the exact number, actually 100 and say maybe $61 million of appropriation for adequacy, but our total adequacy bill was around, or sorry, 961 million, and our total adequacy bill is 963 million. So what the process is the Department of Education draws a warrant on the Education Trust Fund to get that excess appropriation. On the other side of things, so for fiscal year 21, we had about $12 million of excess appropriation in the Education Trust Fund. As of we're anticipating that right now. We have one final adequacy calculation that we do in April every year. So we do have that flexibility. It is very helpful when we're talking about 2 or 3 years out and the kids aren't even in the schools yet, and especially in a year like this year.
Well, I'll keep on moving through the slides and then we'll get to some enrollment data shortly. So this is 2021. This is a adequacy spreadsheet that shows you if you want to walk a town through the formula, you can see the components and see them through the different columns.
And just this is important too, because this has the fiscal capacity aid and the free and reduced lunch aid. So you can see some towns right here, like a town like Hampstead didn't receive an additional grant for free and reduced lunch,
So yeah,
or for the equalized valuation. But then you have some towns like Groton, they received an additional free and reduced lunch count, but they didn't receive anything for equalized valuation because they have a very high equalized valuation in Groton.
Yep. So yeah, that 12% threshold, they didn't achieve that threshold, so they didn't get any additional aid. And then their EVPP over $1 million, so they didn't qualify for fiscal capacity disparity. That's just that town, for example. This is still town by town for 2021. Here's adequacy for 2022 current law. So if you looked up above, the total ADM was 167 for 2021. Now it's gone down to 160, so that's about a 4% drop. The FNR numbers, 45,000 in 2021, but current law at the moment and current data that we have, we did a cursory scrub of the data. This number is growing, so it will get bigger as the year progresses, but it still appears to be a problem that communities are facing. But yeah, you'll see that 45,000, that drops down under current law and current data, 34,000, so that's a 24% drop. And then the governor's budget redoes this calculation to bring these numbers up, and I think his budget brings it up to around 44,000. So it doesn't totally bring the budget up to 45.6 thousand, but brings it up to closer to that number. And that's a state fiscal year 2022 current law, not the governor's proposed, but just current law.
Representative Heath.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm a school district. I've been given my allocation. Caitlin sent those out to school districts. And I'm going into my town meetings. It's town voting day is coming up. And I've had to prepare my budget based on the numbers that have been given me by the department, based on what they have. That's what it had to be. So I am ending up looking like we're having a big drop, when in fact, based on HB2, it might not be as big. And there are a couple of bills coming through the House and Senate right now that maybe will look at the enrollment numbers being held harmless. So if I'm a school district, what do I do? What would I say to my constituents if they asked me, what budget should I put in to address the needs that are happening right now in my schools?
So I kind of hate to pass the buck on this one, but the Department of Revenue really controls what they will allow the school district to put in for a budget and estimated aid. So we are going to have to work with the department. The school is going to have to work with the Department of Revenue, and I'm not sure if they have a process to say, we actually have found 50 free and reduced lunch kids, and so then we can actually add them in, or they. I'm not actually sure what the DRA's response to that is, but you're absolutely correct that if a school district is using a November 15th estimate, the Department of Education has to prepare the in law, so we have no flexibility on what to do with that calculation, that a school district may be using a lower than actual state revenue.
Thank you. Great answer, Caitlin.
And there is an opportunity, as some of that money comes in, they can retain some of that money, a certain percentage of it. But you're right, it is a budgeting challenge because the state budget will likely come after a school budget.
Mary, I think the best thing to do at this point is flip a coin.
I agree.
Similar to the governor's budget, was redesigning how to calculate the amount of pupils. There's another bill out there in the Senate, Senate Bill 135, and it's a different calculation to deal with enrollment issues. And so what Senate Bill 135 does is it looks at what are your enrollment numbers this year for all your base adequacy counts, your FNR counts, your ELL counts, your SPED counts, all of those counts, and goes, what was it this year? What is it last year? Pick the bigger of the two numbers. So based on Senate Bill 135, over current law, it's about $45 million. So $28 million or $30 million over the governor's budget. But that's another proposed enrollment recalculation, nothing to the formula except for how we decide how many students to count. And this is a town by town, so you can also see that. And then, so this is the pupil data. And it kind of get tripped up when you talk about adequacy because the student count is always a year behind. So we're going to be using these numbers, the 2021 school year, we're going to be using that for state fiscal year 22. And the 19-20 school year is going to be used for state fiscal year 21. So there's always a lag in the data as far as when you get paid. And so this just shows you some of those enrollment numbers, and you can see town by town how your town is doing. This is their total pupils, so total students. And then most communities have seen a decrease. Some communities have grown their number of students, like Ashland. And then this is the free and reduced price meal eligible students. And so some communities have increased the number of students they have with that, for that population. But again, most have seen a decrease. And you can see this town by town. This is a bigger picture enrollment table. And so this shows you different grade levels. It goes back 10 years. So this is the average change year over year for the 10-year period. So I actually took out this last, because state fiscal year 20, the numbers impacted by the pandemic, I took this out, and this number gets closer to 1%, which is kind of in line with what we've seen historical if you take out this year as an anomaly. But over the 10-year period, it's enrollments declined by 1.6%.
And just a point for people too, so there were a lot of in the fall newspaper articles talking about like a 6 or 7% decline in various different districts and across the state. And I know you just heard Mark and I say a 4% decline. Part of that is because if you look at, so if you look at preschool, for example, there was almost a 50% reduction in the number of preschool kids in public schools. So when you're talking about statewide numbers, we use P through 12. However, when we're talking about adequacy, we're only talking about K through 12. So that's just one of the things that I just wanted to point out, just because there's been some confusion of that.
So this is, okay, preschool, okay, plus, all right, thank you.
And this is,
yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
yeah, that's okay. The top says public and private fall enrollment.
Mhm.
Where
so-
am I seeing
Oh,
the
sorry,
private?
it should say
private.
public and, yeah. It should say public, public and non-public. So this is private right here.
Okay, so if I'm looking at this correctly, it's 16,994 in private schools.
Yes, that is the enrollment that reported to us as of this fall.
Okay, thank you. So that their enrollment also dropped.
They actually had a slight increase from 20 to 21, but they have experienced declines across the state, just like the traditional public schools. I'm at about the same 1% rate that the public schools have experienced.
Sorry, I was reading the wrong numbers.
Yep, this percentage is over the 10-year period. And then the homeschool, home educated students, that's self-reported data. So it's not as reliable as, say, our public school data. But this is what's been reported to us. That number's jumped up a good amount. And then this is,
Representative Umberger, this is actually the spreadsheet that you had asked for specifically, which shows the one-time aid, the federal funding that the school districts have received, and then additionally the one-time state aid. So we're not actually prepared to talk to you about the federal one-time aid today during part of this meeting. I believe Tammy Valancourt will cover that at a later date when she talks about the bigger Department of Education budget and some of our federal funding. But you did ask for this. So what we put on here, so we have our enrollments, and then we have, to date, the schools have received, or there's been allocated to schools 3 large grants and then some smaller here and there grants, but 3 large school grants that most schools in the state have received. As part of the federal aid packages that the state of New Hampshire has received. ESSER 1 is part of the CARES Act, and the state received about $34 million that was distributed to schools, plus an additional amount the state received. SPSRF funding was an additional amount of money that the governor allocated directly out of the money that the discretionary money that the state had. This governor chose to allocate to schools a $200 per school for every single student in response to COVID-19, and then an additional $10 million of discretionary money that schools could apply for if they had costs above and beyond the $200 per student. So that was about $45 million across the state. And then we have a draft ESSER 2 allocation. So that's from the federal CARISA grant, which was essentially COVID CARES Act number 2, which is going to bring another $140 million across the state to be allocated to school districts to mitigate COVID-19 related expenses. And both ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 were allocated in a proportional amount to the Title I formula. That is in the federal law, meaning the Department of Education didn't have any ability to kind of modify that formula or whatnot. And the ESSER 1 allocation, we put it in fiscal year 21 because the department distributed it at the end of fiscal year 20, and school districts really hadn't gotten a chance to spend any of it in 21. So most of it really will be, or sorry, in 20. So most of it will be spent in 21. The draft ESSER money that was allocated, or the schools were told of their award several weeks ago, and that money is going out soon. And then obviously we have the one-time grants that we've talked about a few times throughout this presentation, and that money was received by the schools beginning in September. And so this is all of the one-time money. So school districts, you can see it's a pretty hefty number across the state of $270 million of one-time unanticipated funding that schools received.
So will the ESSER 2 money carry over to next year?
Yes.
Okay, so okay, good, thank you.
And I mean, there's a potential for another award too. I mean, they're talking about the federal stimulus package that was passed. I think it was over the weekend by the House. It obviously needs to go through the Senate. The Senate is, who knows what they'll end up doing with it, but you know, it's potentially quite a bit of money that's going to the state. Mark also just scrolled down to the last page here that shows that charter schools were also eligible for ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and SPSF funding. They did not receive the extra one-time disparity aid in the funding formula for whatever reason. But so this is the one-time money that they're receiving federally.
And then
Thank
this
you.
is,
I can't read, well, I can read the numbers, but I'll look at it when
Yeah.
I receive it from Mickey.
So that's all we have for our presentation today. I mean, we actually have a half hour left. We'll take any questions, anything that we can discuss about the topics that were discussed today. And I do just want to remind the committee that I believe you have, I think it's on Monday, another meeting scheduled with Tammy Valancourt, the department CFO, to discuss individual department programs and department operations.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. And tell Tammy we're very nice people, okay?
I will.
Are there any further questions for Caitlin? Oh, yes, Representative Murray, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you. Back on page 41, can you just give a few words about the homes educated students? It's quite an erratic number up and down. I mean, even from, it's hard for me to read some of the years. I guess it's 15 to 16 to 16 to 17. That's a big drop, and then it's creeping back up. Any insight into why those numbers change that dramatically?
So the change in the numbers is, I think, mostly relative to the way that homeschool kids are reported. So in the past, all homeschool kids had to report to the school districts. School districts reported information directly to the Department of Education. The laws changed, and so homeschool kids only needed to be reported to the Department of Education once in a child's career, and it could be reported to the department, to a non-public school, to a public school. So the data reporting side of things just changed. We're not sure if the number of homeschool kids changed. I don't believe that it did. It's just more of the self-reporting mechanism hasn't resulted in the same type of data being reported to the department.
Follow up?
Please.
Is that a problem in terms of the information that you're getting around the students? So you're missing information that you used to get?
There's no information that the department is required to collect that we're not receiving, but the department is not really required to receive very much at all on homeschool children. So.
Okay, are there any further questions or comments? Okay, once again, I really want to thank everyone from DOE for talking to us, and we will have a great deal of information to look at, to think about, and to try to come to grips with how we're and what we're going to do. And since we didn't think that 0 was a good idea for 23, we'll have to also think about that and what we need to do. So if there's nothing else, I will just say I will see all of you tomorrow.
I just want to say too, thank you to the committee for taking the time to listen to us today, talk about our programs. These programs are very important to the department and the staff that administer them. I think you can probably see that today from some of the passion that they express when they're talking about their programs. And so we really appreciate you taking the time to listen, to make sure that you have all of the appropriate information that you need when making very large budget decisions that we know that are not taken lightly. So if you need anything, Mickey knows how to find us. You all know how to find us, so reach out whenever you can.
Okay, thank you. I would like to say that next Tuesday is town meeting day. I don't know how many of you are going to be involved in the town meeting business, but we decided not to meet on Tuesday of next week because of town meeting. And Mickey, did we get set up for Friday?
It's going to be scheduled now. So the first 3 for next week: Monday with DOE, Wednesday I believe with safety, Thursday with DOT, and Janet's scheduling Friday now. She was, I
That's,
think, waiting for a time. You want to do 10 o'clock?
yes.
Okay.
Oh, how long we run on each of those days will be extremely dependent on the number of questions that we have. But I hope that we have a lot of questions, because I think it's important that we are able to fully understand the budget. And as hopefully all of you know, Ways and Means did us no favor when they put out the projected revenue. So there are going to be some hard decisions that we have to make. And it's not just in general funds, it's in all the funds. So we'll keep smiling, and hopefully we'll manage to get through this. We also will have some bills that we'll need to hold public hearings on that came out of last Wednesday and Thursday's session. So I don't know.
So, I'm sorry, Madam Chair, am I understanding correctly that what you're anticipating is next week we will be meeting on, not on Tuesday, but Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday?
That's correct.
Okay, great. All right, thank you.
Oh, I hope no one minds that we meet for the morning and basically generally have the afternoon free to do other things. I personally find that better for me because I think we all have Zoom meetings running out of our ears. And so it does allow us to schedule those other things in the afternoon. So hopefully everybody is doing well. Kate, you got your first shot, right?
I'm sorry?
You got your
Yes,
first.
I got my first shot and no side effects, except, it kind of made me feel sort of happy in the head. So, I was like, oh, I don't even have a thought. This is just so relaxing. But I don't know if that was me or the shot. So.
Oh, well, we had a cartoon in our paper on Saturday, I think it was, where a person was sitting in a chair and obviously hadn't gotten their COVID shot. And then a person that had gotten their COVID shot skipping across the floor. So, okay, so Mary, where do you stand on your COVID shot?
I've already had one shot and I've got my second shot on March 18th. So I'm almost there.
Okay, Representative Lynn?
I'm getting my first shot on Friday. In fact, it's at noontime, so I may have to, and it's in Londonderry, so I may have to bow out a little early, and then they'll schedule me for my second one that day. So hopefully it'll be not too long.
And I've had both shots. So we'll, what can I say? And Tom, what about you?
I have received one and I'm waiting on the second one.
And Mickey, you are so young that now they did say that the group 1B will be finished sometime in April, which is really good. And then we'll go on to the next group. So, and then we've got the Johnson & Johnson coming out. So all kinds of good things going to happen. So with that, I will see you all tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Okay.